They threw Bella out, thinking she was worthless because she was adopted. But today they stood in shame at her royal wedding. Bella was adopted, mistreated, and eventually forced to marry a man they thought was poor. But what they didn't know was that her husband, Peter, was actually a prince. Now Bella is about to have the biggest wedding the kingdom has ever seen. And when her adoptive parents, Chris and Amanda, receive an invitation, they can't believe it. Could it really be the same Bella they once treated so badly? They laughed, thinking it was a mistake. But when they arrived at the wedding, the truth left them in complete shock. The queen was eager to meet her son's bride. She had heard so much about Bella, the girl who had won Prince Peter's heart, but nothing could have prepared her for the moment they finally met. Dressed in her royal gown, the queen stood at the grand entrance of the palace, waiting for Bella's arrival. Servants lined up in neat rows, the golden palace gates slowly opened, and there stood Bella, looking shy yet graceful. She wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but her beauty was undeniable. Her eyes held both fear and wonder as she took in the sight of the enormous palace, its golden chandeliers, the sparkling marble floors, and the royal guards standing tall. As soon as Bella stepped forward, the queen's face lit up with a warm, motherly smile. She could see that Bella was nervous, her hands clasped tightly together, but there was something about her that touched the queen's heart. Maybe it was the kindness in Bella's eyes or the humility in her posture. But in that moment, the queen knew that her son had chosen wisely. "Come here, my dear," the queen said gently, opening her arms. Bella hesitated for a moment, unsure if she was allowed to embrace the queen, but before she could think further, the queen pulled her into a warm hug. Bella's heart pounded. She had never felt this kind of love before, not from a mother. It was comforting, safe, and real. "You are home now," the queen whispered, holding Bella's hands. Tears welled up in Bella's eyes. She had always dreamed of having a real family, one that loved and accepted her. But after years of suffering under Chris and Amanda's cruelty, she had stopped believing it was possible. Now, standing before the queen, feeling her warmth and kindness, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had finally found the love she had been missing all her life. The queen noticed Bella's teary eyes and gently wiped away a tear with her thumb. "There's no need to cry, my child. You are part of our family now." Bella nodded, unable to speak, but her heart felt full. With that, the queen took Bella's hand and led her into the palace. As they walked through the grand hallways, the queen spoke softly, telling Bella stories of the palace, its history, and the traditions of the royal family. She wanted Bella to feel comfortable, to know that this was her home too. They arrived at a beautifully decorated room, Bella's new chamber. It was unlike anything Bella had ever seen. The bed was huge, covered in soft white silk sheets. The walls were adorned with golden patterns, and a large chandelier hung from the ceiling, sparkling like a million stars. A group of maids stood at attention, ready to assist her with anything she needed. "This is your room," the queen said, watching Bella's reaction. Bella's eyes widened in shock. "Mom, my room?" she whispered, barely believing it. "Yes, my dear. Everything here belongs to you now. You are the future princess of this kingdom, and you deserve nothing but the best." Bella took a small step inside, running her fingers over the silky bed sheets, touching the soft curtains. It all felt like a dream. Could this really be happening? The queen chuckled, sensing Bella's disbelief. "It's real, my child, and from now on you will be treated with the love and respect you deserve." Bella turned to look at the queen, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. The queen smiled and placed a hand on Bella's cheek. "You don't have to thank me, Bella. I should be the one thanking you. You have brought happiness to my son's heart, and for that I will forever cherish you." Bella couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She fell to her knees, overwhelmed with emotions. The queen knelt down beside her, hugging her tightly. "You are safe now," she whispered. "No one will ever mistreat you again." At that moment, Bella knew that her life had truly changed. She was no longer the unwanted orphan, no longer the girl who had to beg for love. She was now part of a family, a real family, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly loved. It was an ordinary afternoon in Chris and Amanda's house. Amanda sat on the couch, lazily flipping through a magazine, while Chris sipped his tea. Anne was in her room, throwing a tantrum over something as usual. The house was quiet except for Anne's occasional yelling. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Amanda frowned. "Who could that be?" she muttered, getting up. When she opened the door, a royal messenger stood there, dressed in fine clothes with a golden seal on his chest. He held out a beautifully decorated envelope. "This is an invitation from the royal palace," the messenger said with a bow. "You are invited to the wedding of Prince Peter and his bride, Bella." Amanda's hands froze as she took the invitation. Her eyes widened in shock. "Bella?" she whispered, almost dropping the envelope. Chris, who had heard the conversation, quickly stood up and walked over. "What did you just say?" he asked, snatching the invitation from Amanda's hands. The messenger simply bowed again. "The wedding will take place in 3 days at the royal palace. We hope to see you there." With that, he turned and left, leaving Chris and Amanda standing in stunned silence. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Amanda's hands trembled as she pointed at the golden letters on the invitation. "This can't be the Bella we know," she said, shaking her head. "It must be a mistake." Chris scoffed. "Of course it's a mistake. That girl is useless. She could never marry a prince." Amanda nodded quickly, trying to convince herself. Yes. Maybe there's another Bella in town. There's no way our Bella—" She stopped, refusing to even call Bella theirs. "Could end up in the royal family." But deep down, doubt started creeping in. Chris and Amanda looked at each other, their laughter dying down as they considered the impossible. "What if—" Amanda started. Chris clenched his jaw. "Number, it's not her." He threw the invitation on the table. Just then, Anne walked into the room, her face twisted in annoyance. "Why are you both standing there looking so stupid?" she snapped. Amanda quickly picked up the invitation. "Anne, we received a royal wedding invitation," she said, forcing a smile. "Prince Peter's getting married." Anne rolled her eyes. "So what? Why should I care?" Chris hesitated before he spoke. "His bride's name is Bella." Anne's face darkened. "Bella?" she repeated, crossing her arms. "You mean that worthless girl you forced to marry a poor man?" She let out a loud laugh. "There's no way she could be the same Bella." Chris and Amanda exchanged uneasy glances. Anne noticed. "Wait, you don't actually believe it's her, do you?" she scoffed. "That girl is nothing. She's probably scrubbing floors somewhere while I'm here living like a queen." Amanda forced a laugh. "Of course, darling. That's what we thought too. But—" She looked back at the invitation, her fingers tightening around it. Chris cleared his throat. "There's only one way to know for sure," he muttered. Amanda's eyes snapped to his. "You mean go to the wedding?" Chris nodded slowly. "Yes, just to confirm. If it's not her, we'll laugh about it and leave. But if it is—" He didn't finish his sentence. Amanda swallowed hard. "But what if it is her?" she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. Chris's face darkened. "Then we'll see for ourselves how she ended up there." Anne rolled her eyes again. "Fine, whatever. Let's go." "But I know it's not her. That girl is pathetic." Chris and Amanda sat in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. The memory of Bella, the girl they had mistreated, the girl they had thrown away like trash, haunted them. If it really was her, what would they do? Amanda forced a smile and took a deep breath. "Well, it's settled then. We'll attend the wedding." Chris nodded, but deep inside, he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling growing in his chest. Anne, the daughter of Chris and Amanda, was a very beautiful girl, but her heart was not as lovely as her face. From the moment she could talk, she always got everything she wanted. If she didn't get her way, she would scream, cry, or throw things. Chris and Amanda never corrected her. Instead, they would rush to comfort her, telling her she was the most precious girl in the world. As Anne grew older, her behavior became worse. She never said please or thank you. She spoke to the maids as if they were her slaves, often yelling at them for no reason. If her food was not served the way she wanted, she would throw the plate on the floor and demand another. The maids feared her, but Chris and Amanda never saw anything wrong. They would say, "She's just a child," laughing as if it was funny. While Bella worked hard every day and never lifted a finger. She refused to do anything that required effort. If her room was messy, she would shout for Bella to clean it. If she misplaced her shoes, she would blame Bella and make her look for them. And every time Bella tried to say something, Anne would cut her off with a rude, "You're just adopted. Do as I say." At school, Anne was no different. She was rude to her teachers and classmates, but since she was the daughter of a rich family, the teachers were afraid to punish her. She never did her homework and often bullied other kids. If she ever got into trouble, Chris and Amanda would rush to the school, scolding the teachers instead of correcting Anne. "Our daughter is perfect. You must be mistaken," they would say. One day at a family gathering, Anne embarrassed everyone. While the adults were having a conversation, Anne interrupted them, demanding a new necklace she had seen at the mall. When her mother told her to wait, Anne stomped her feet and screamed, "You don't love me? If you loved me, you would buy it right now." Instead of correcting her, Amanda quickly got her purse and said, "Fine, let's go buy it, my sweet girl." The guests looked at each other in shock, but Chris and Amanda acted as if nothing was wrong. As the years passed, Anne became even more arrogant and disrespectful. She believed she was better than everyone else. If she visited a friend's house and didn't like the furniture, she would make rude comments. If someone praised another girl's beauty, she would roll her eyes and say, "She's not as pretty as me." One day, a maid accidentally spilled water on Anne's expensive dress. Instead of forgiving her, Anne threw the glass at the maid's feet, causing her to cry. When Bella tried to defend the maid, Anne laughed and said, "She's just a maid. Who cares?" Chris and Amanda did not scold Anne. Instead, they fired the maid for being careless. No matter how bad Anne's attitude was, her parents never saw a problem. They spoiled her endlessly, always making excuses for her behavior. When neighbors complained, Chris and Amanda would simply say, "They are jealous of our daughter." They never realized they were raising a selfish and unkind person. But life has a way of teaching lessons. One day, Anne would learn that beauty and wealth were not enough. And when that day came, there would be no one to protect her from the consequences of her actions. The entire kingdom was filled with excitement as preparations for the royal wedding of Prince Peter and Bella began. The king had ordered that invitations be sent to every town and city, making sure that people from far and near would come to celebrate this grand occasion. The palace was alive with activity, and every servant worked tirelessly to ensure that everything was perfect. Inside the grand palace, beautiful golden decorations were being put up. Large crystal chandeliers shined brightly, and the floors were polished until they sparkled. The queen personally oversaw the arrangements, making sure that the flowers were fresh and arranged beautifully. Royal chefs prepared the finest meals, filling the air with the delicious aroma of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet cakes. The royal tailors worked day and night to make Bella's wedding dress. It was a magnificent white gown, fitted with the finest diamonds that shimmered in the light. When Bella first saw the dress, tears filled her eyes. She couldn't believe that a girl like her, who had once been treated so badly, was now going to be a princess. But even with all the joy around her, Bella still felt nervous. She sat by the palace window, looking at the large garden below. She thought about her past, how she had spent years doing house chores, eating only after everyone else had finished, and being treated like a servant. She remembered how Chris and Amanda had forced her to marry Peter, thinking he was just a poor man. They never cared about her happiness. They only wanted to get rid of her. But now everything had changed. Peter was not a poor man. He was a prince. He had chosen her, not because of her background, but because he loved her for who she was. This thought made Bella's heart warm. She realized that this was her new beginning. She was no longer the unwanted girl in Chris and Amanda's house. She was about to become a princess. Meanwhile, Peter was also preparing for the big day. He wore his official ceremonial suit, a rich royal blue outfit with golden embroidery. He looked handsome and regal, and his parents, the king and queen, were proud of him. They knew he had found a good wife, someone who was kind, humble, and strong. As the wedding day got closer, the palace became busier. Maids ran around making last-minute arrangements, musicians practiced the wedding songs, and the royal guard stood tall, ready to welcome the guests. The entire kingdom was talking about the wedding, and everyone was eager to see the new princess. On the night before the wedding, the queen visited Bella's room. She took Bella's hands and smiled warmly. "My dear, from tomorrow onwards, "You will not only be my son's wife, but you will also be my daughter," she said. Bella felt a lump in her throat. She had never been called a daughter with such love before. She hugged the queen tightly, feeling safe and loved. That night, Bella lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She was excited, but also a little scared. She wondered if she was truly ready for this new life. But then she thought about Peter, his kindness, his love, and how he had chosen her even when she had nothing. That thought gave her strength. The morning of the wedding finally arrived. The sun shined brightly, and the palace was filled with guests dressed in their finest clothes. The entire kingdom had come to witness the grand wedding of their beloved prince. As Bella got ready, the maids helped her put on her beautiful gown. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she hardly recognized the girl staring back at her. She looked like a true princess. With her heart beating fast, Bella took a deep breath. This was it. This was the day her life would change forever. And for the first time in a long time, she truly felt happy. The sun rose beautifully over the kingdom, casting a golden glow over the grand palace. Birds chirped happily as if they too were celebrating this special day. The entire palace was decorated with bright flowers, golden drapes, and shining chandeliers. Every corner of the palace looked magical, as if it had come straight out of a fairy tale. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, and the sound of soft music played by royal musicians echoed through the halls. Inside the palace, Bella stood in front of a large mirror in her royal chamber. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. She looked breathtakingly beautiful in her wedding dress, a long white gown covered in sparkling diamonds. The dress fit her perfectly, making her look like a true princess. The sleeves were delicate and made of the finest lace, and the skirt flowed gracefully like waves in the ocean. A golden tiara with small, twinkling pearls rested gently on her head, and her long, dark hair was styled in soft curls that framed her face. Her hands trembled slightly as the royal maids put the final touches on her look. "You look so beautiful, my lady," one of them said with a smile. Bella smiled back, but deep inside she felt emotional. Just a few months ago, she was being treated like a servant in Chris and Amanda's house, and now she was about to marry a prince. She took a deep breath, fighting back tears of happiness. In another part of the palace, Prince Peter was also getting ready. He stood tall and handsome in his official ceremonial suit. The royal tailors had spent weeks designing it, and it was truly a masterpiece. His suit was deep blue, embroidered with golden patterns that symbolized the strength and power of the royal family. His shoes were polished until they shone, and his royal cape draped elegantly over his shoulders. A golden brooch, shaped like a lion, was pinned to his chest, representing his status as the future king. As Peter adjusted his cuffs, the king walked in. He placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder and smiled. "Today is a special day, my son," he said. "Bella is a wonderful woman, and I know she will make a great princess." Peter nodded, feeling proud and excited. He had found a wife who loved him for who he was, not for his wealth or title. Outside the palace, the streets were filled with people who had come from far and wide to witness the grand wedding. Banners with Bella and Peter's names hung everywhere, and the air was filled with laughter and joy. The palace gates were heavily guarded, and only invited guests were allowed inside. Noblemen, kings, and queens from other kingdoms arrived in their royal carriages, dressed in their finest clothes. Everyone was eager to see the beautiful bride and the handsome prince. At last, the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The grand ballroom of the palace was packed with important guests, all seated on golden chairs. The ceiling was decorated with hanging crystal chandeliers, making the entire room sparkle. The red carpet leading to the altar was covered in rose petals, carefully placed by the palace maids. The music changed and everyone turned their heads towards the entrance. Bella stepped in, walking gracefully with the queen by her side. The moment she appeared, the entire room gasped. She was stunning, like a goddess walking among humans. Even Peter, who had seen her many times before, couldn't take his eyes off her. His heart swelled with love and admiration. Bella walked slowly down the aisle, her heart pounding. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, but the only pair of eyes she cared about were Peter's. When she finally reached him, he gently took her hand, squeezing it softly as if to say, "I'm here." She smiled at him, her eyes filled with happiness. The wedding ceremony began, and the royal priest spoke in a deep, powerful voice. "Today we join Prince Peter and Lady Bella in holy matrimony," he declared. The vows were exchanged, and when the priest finally said, "You may now kiss the bride," Peter gently lifted Bella's veil and placed a soft, loving kiss on her lips. The entire room erupted in applause, and the sound of trumpets filled the air. After the ceremony, the celebration began. The palace chefs had prepared a grand feast, with tables filled with the finest dishes from all over the kingdom. There were golden plates of roasted meat, fresh fruits, honey cakes, and sparkling wine. The guests ate, laughed, and danced, celebrating the union of their beloved prince and his beautiful bride. Chris and Amanda arrived at the royal palace on the day of the wedding, still unsure if the rumors were true. They had spent days laughing at the idea that Bella, the orphan girl they had treated so poorly, could be the bride of a real prince. It was impossible. Bella was just a useless girl, good only for house chores. There was no way she could have ended up in a place as grand as this. As they stepped into the large, beautifully decorated courtyard, their eyes widened. The palace was filled with guests, all dressed in the finest clothes. Golden chandeliers sparkled, flowers of every color covered the walkways, and soft music played in the background. The scent of fresh roses filled the air, making everything feel magical. The wedding of a prince was truly a sight to behold. Chris and Amanda, however, were not among the honored guests. They were forced to stand far at the back near the gates, where only commoners and outsiders watched from a distance. They grumbled at the treatment, but their curiosity kept them rooted in place. They had to see for themselves if the bride was really Bella. Then the grand wedding march began. A hush fell over the crowd as the palace doors slowly opened. Out walked Prince Peter, dressed in his royal ceremonial suit. He looked elegant, powerful, and every bit like a future king. The guests clapped and cheered as he walked toward the grand stage, waiting for his bride. Chris and Amanda held their breath as the moment of truth arrived. The crowd turned toward the entrance, and then she appeared. Bella. She stepped out, her beauty shining brighter than the diamonds on her dress. She wore a white gown fitted with the finest diamonds, shimmering like the stars in the night sky. A long, flowing veil covered her face, but her graceful walk and the way she carried herself made it clear. This was not the same girl they had mistreated. This was a queen in the making. Chris and Amanda's jaws dropped. Their eyes widened in shock. "No, this can't be," Amanda whispered, gripping Chris's arm. Chris blinked rapidly, shaking his head as if trying to wake up from a dream. "That's not her. It's impossible." But it was her. Bella, the girl they had forced to marry a poor man. The girl they had kicked out of their home without a second thought. Now she was walking down the aisle of a grand palace, about to become a princess. Anne, who had tagged along with them, scoffed. "This must be a joke," she muttered. But for the first time in her life, even she couldn't hide the look of jealousy on her face. As Bella reached Prince Peter, he gently lifted her veil, revealing her radiant face. The entire crowd gasped at her beauty, and the king and queen smiled proudly. They had gained not just a daughter-in-law, but a future queen. Chris and Amanda, on the other hand, felt their knees go weak. They looked at each other, their faces pale with disbelief. They had thrown Bella away like she was worthless. They had treated her like a servant while spoiling Anne, who now stood beside them with a scowl on her face. Chris swallowed hard. "We should leave," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Amanda, still frozen in shock, shook her head. "No, we have to talk to her. Maybe she will forgive us. Maybe..." But before they could take a step forward, the royal guards approached, blocking their path. One of them spoke firmly. "Only invited guests are allowed beyond this point." Chris and Amanda felt their hearts sink. They were nothing but spectators at Bella's grand moment. They had lost their chance. As Bella and Prince Peter exchanged vows, Chris and Amanda stood in silence, their minds filled with regret. They had underestimated Bella. They had believed she would never amount to anything. But now she was standing before them, loved, cherished, and respected by an entire kingdom. Chris let out a deep sigh. "We made a mistake." Amanda's eyes filled with tears, but it was too late. The girl they had mistreated had become a princess, and there was nothing they could do to change the past. As Bella and Peter danced toward the grand entrance, celebrating their wedding, Chris and Amanda turned away in shock, walking out of the palace with their heads lowered in shame.